A dedicated soldier, Ethan Cole, notices a bruise on Marina, a quiet civilian maid on base, and senses a deeper fear she cannot voice. As he gently earns her trust, he uncovers a pattern of intimidation and harassment tied to a powerful officer whose authority shields him from scrutiny. Ethan struggles between military protocol and moral duty, torn by memories of past injustices. As Marina's fear grows and the officer's actions escalate, Ethan chooses to intervene, setting in motion a chain of confrontations, secrets, and rising tension that threatens to shake the entire base, long before the final reckoning arrives. Night had already fallen across Fort Delaney when Staff Sergeant Ethan Cole stepped out of the barracks, the cold desert wind scraping across the steel siding like a warning whispered in the dark. Floodlights carved long silver lines over the gravel, but the edges of the base remained swallowed in shadow. Ethan had always trusted the night. It was the hour when truth surfaced. Tonight, however, truth would come for him in a way he never expected. He was heading toward the supply quarters when he noticed her, Marina, the civilian maid assigned to the officer's wing, walking briskly across the courtyard with her coat pulled too tightly around her. She usually moved with quiet confidence, the kind of woman who had survived more than she ever spoke about. But tonight she walked like someone hoping no one would see her. Ethan slowed, instinct prickling. The wind shifted, catching the hem of her coat and revealing the faintest glimpse of something dark on her upper arm before she tugged the fabric back into place. He had seen bruises before, on soldiers, on civilians, on himself, but something about the way Marina hid it made his chest tighten. She wasn't clumsy. She didn't complain. And she never asked for help. Yet the bruise had been there, a spreading shadow barely covered by worn fabric. Ethan watched her slip into the side entrance of the laundry facility, her shoulders hunched, her steps hurried. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. The base had rules. Boundaries. A soldier interfering in civilian matters could set off alarms he wasn't ready to navigate. Still, something rooted him in place. It wasn't his job to protect her. That was the first lie he told himself. The truth, the deeper truth, was carved from memories he despised. His mother, soft-voiced and tired-eyed, had once hidden bruises too. Ethan remembered the way she'd tug her sleeves down, the same way Marina had just done. He remembered being 12 and promising himself he would never again look away from someone in pain. Even if it meant consequences. Even if it cost him more than he wanted to imagine. That old vow rose now like an echo calling him forward. He followed her inside. The laundry facility was warm and humming, machines cycling like steady mechanical breathing. Marina stood near a metal folding table, her back to him, trying to roll up her sleeve just enough to inspect the damage. Ethan didn't mean to startle her, but when he stepped closer, she flinched hard, pulling her arm to her chest as if bracing for impact. That reaction alone sent a pulse of anger through him, an anger he kept carefully leashed. "Marina," he said quietly, palms open, voice steady despite the sharp edge cutting through his thoughts. "It's just me." She didn't lift her gaze at first. The fluorescent lights flickered above them, casting pale bands across the floor. When she finally raised her head, her eyes held the wet sheen of someone fighting not to break. "I'm fine," she whispered, though the bruise beneath her sleeve told a different story. Ethan had seen injuries from training accidents, bar fights, even domestic disputes among enlisted couples. This one didn't look accidental. This one carried intention. He stepped closer, slow enough to give her space to pull away. She didn't. That, in itself, told him more than words. The hum of the machines grew louder, a strange soundtrack to the quiet collapse happening in front of him. "Who did this?" he asked. Direct. Controlled. Not a soldier demanding answers, just a man trying to understand. Marina hesitated, her fingers trembling over the bruised skin. "It doesn't matter," she murmured. "I just need to finish my shift." But Ethan knew when a person had been taught to minimize their suffering. He knew the language of fear. He could press her. He could report it. He could drag the truth into the open. But doing so without her consent would risk whatever fragile safety she still believed she had. So he shifted his stance, softening his voice. "You don't deserve this," he said. Her breath hitched. Not from pain, from disbelief. As if kindness was a language she hadn't heard spoken to her in years. The realization cut deeper than the sight of the bruise itself. For a moment, neither of them moved. The dryers rumbled. Steam hissed. The bass outside continued its rhythm. Marina finally exhaled, a small, broken sound that landed between them like a confession. She lowered her sleeve slowly, almost apologetically, as if hiding the bruise could undo the moment. "Please don't ask me anything else," she whispered. "They'll take my job if anyone knows." The word they curled in Ethan's mind like smoke. Vague. Threatening. Wrong. He wanted to ask who. He wanted to know what kind of person left a mark like that on someone who spent her days cleaning up after others, often invisible, always polite. But she was already stepping away, gathering a stack of folded uniforms with shaking hands. Fear clung to her movements like a second skin, pale and trembling beneath the harsh fluorescent glow. Ethan stood motionless, the weight of the moment sinking into him like cold water. He knew he couldn't follow her further tonight, not without crossing a line she wasn't ready for him to cross. But he also knew something else with fierce certainty. Whatever danger had touched her had not ended with that bruise. It lingered, waiting, watching. And if it could reach her once, it could reach her again. As he stepped back out into the night, the wind carried the distant echo of boots on concrete, the murmurs of soldiers finishing their rotations, the heartbeat of a base full of secrets. He looked toward the officer's wing, its windows glowing faintly against the dark. A thought settled in him like a spark catching dry tinder, quiet, dangerous, impossible to ignore. Someone on this base had hurt her. And tonight, he would find out who. The next morning rose with a pale, indifferent sun, its light stretching across Fort Delaney as if trying to illuminate what the night had hidden. Reveille sounded through the barracks with its usual sharp authority, but Ethan Cole woke before it, his mind replaying the image of Marina's bruised arm like a looping reel he couldn't shut off. Sleep had hovered at the edge of his consciousness but never fully claimed him. Every time his eyes closed, he saw that moment in the laundry room, the flinch, the whispered plea, the fear she didn't bother disguising. By the time boots hit gravel outside, Ethan was already dressed, lacing his uniform with a tension knotted tight behind his ribs. He stepped into the crisp morning air, where soldiers moved with practiced efficiency. The base had its own heartbeat, steady and predictable, but today Ethan felt something off, an undertone of unease thrumming beneath the normal rhythm. As he headed toward the mess hall, his thoughts circled Marina again and again. Civilization had rules, the military had more. But there were also human rules, the kind carved into the conscience long before laws were written. Someone had broken those. Inside the mess hall, chatter bounced off metal tables. Officers and enlisted men gathered in separate clusters, conversations overlapping. Ethan grabbed a tray, though he doubted he'd eat much, and scanned the room instinctively. People watching was second nature after years in the service. He could read tension in shoulders, guilt in eyes, aggression in posture. But today, every face seemed suspicious. That unsettled him more than he expected. As he approached a table near the back, Lieutenant Harris, sharp-tongued, impeccably groomed, caught his eye. Harris was the kind of officer who mistook intimidation for leadership, and Ethan had clashed with him before. The lieutenant offered a nod that wasn't friendly. "Cole," he said, "you look like you fought a bear in your sleep." Ethan forced a neutral expression. "Long night." Harris smirked. "Maybe get some rest. Wouldn't want you making mistakes during drills." His tone carried an edge Ethan chose to ignore. He took a seat, his attention drifting to the officer's table where Major Rowan sat, stern, controlled, with a gaze that seemed to weigh everyone and find them wanting. For a moment, Ethan watched the major. Rumors surrounded Rowan, none confirmed, all unsettling. He was respected, feared, and difficult to read. Ethan couldn't imagine Marina willingly placing herself near someone like him, yet fear had many faces. After breakfast, Ethan stepped outside, letting the cold air wake what little resolve he had left. He needed to check on Marina, but he also needed to be careful. Civilians on base were protected by protocol, but their safety often depended on the people around them. If the wrong person suspected he was asking questions, Marina could suffer repercussions she couldn't withstand. He made his way toward the officer's wing under the guise of completing supply inventory. As he passed the maintenance corridor, he caught a glimpse of Marina sweeping the floor near the stairwell. Her posture was rigid, her movements precise but lacking their usual quiet grace. She didn't see him at first, but when she did, her eyes flicked to the bruise hidden beneath her sleeve, then back to him, a silent plea, a warning, maybe both. Ethan approached slowly. "Morning," he said softly. She hesitated, then offered a small nod. "Morning, Sergeant." Her voice was thin, stretched tight over something she wasn't saying. Nearby, 2 officers walked past, laughing about something crude and dismissive. Marina stiffened at the sound. Ethan noticed. Once the officers were out of earshot, Ethan lowered his voice. "Are you all right?" She swallowed hard. "I told you, I just need to work. If you keep asking questions—" She broke off, glancing toward the hall. Fear flickered across her face again, raw and unguarded. Ethan followed her gaze but saw nothing except closed doors and silent walls. "Who's threatening you?" he asked. She shook her head, gripping the broom handle tighter. "Please, just leave it." Her eyes shimmered, not with tears, but with the desperation of someone who had learned the cost of speaking. Before he could respond, footsteps echoed down the hall. Major Rowan rounded the corner, his presence chilling the air around him. Marina immediately straightened, her expression shuddering into something practiced. Rowan's gaze passed over Ethan, then lingered on Marina a fraction too long, clinical, assessing. Ethan felt the temperature in his blood drop. "Sergeant Cole," Rowan said. "You're far from your post." Ethan met his gaze evenly. "Inventory check in storage C, sir. Passing through." Rowan hummed as though unconvinced but unwilling to challenge him outright. "See that you stay on task," he said before continuing down the hall. As soon as he turned the corner, Ethan saw Marina's shoulders sag with quiet relief. That reaction told him everything. Once Rowan was safely distant, Ethan leaned closer, speaking low. "Is it him?" Marina's breath hitched, just slightly, almost invisible. But the silence that followed was louder than any confession. She didn't nod. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Fear answered for her. Before Ethan could push further, she whispered, "Please don't get involved. You don't understand what he can do." Her voice trembled, and something inside Ethan snapped, not with anger, but with certainty. He understood exactly what men like Rowan could do. He had seen officers bully, manipulate, abuse their authority under the guise of discipline. He had seen victims punished for speaking out. He had seen corruption buried beneath medals and paperwork. "I'm not going to let him hurt you," Ethan said quietly, and when she looked up at him, something flickered in her eyes, hope against her will. But hope was dangerous. She shook her head quickly. "You can't protect me. Not from him." Ethan stepped back, letting her return to her work, but his jaw tightened with resolve. Rowan's shadow had settled over Marina like a storm cloud. And storms didn't pass unless someone forced them to. The rest of the day unfolded with precise military structure, but Ethan's mind was elsewhere, his instincts sharpening into something steady and unyielding. By evening, he found himself outside Rowan's office, the hallway empty, the door slightly ajar. Voices drifted out, Rowan's low and commanding, another officer responding with nervous agreement. Ethan paused, listening just long enough to confirm what he already feared. Rowan operated under his own rules, and no one challenged him. As night settled again over Fort Delaney, Ethan felt the shape of a decision forming in his chest, heavy, irreversible, burning with purpose. Someone had hurt Marina. Someone had made her afraid to speak. And if the bruises were only the beginning, then tonight he would have to decide just how far he was willing to go to stop whatever was coming. The base was quiet, but inside Ethan, a storm had already begun. Night returned to Fort Delaney like a slow-closing fist, wrapping the base in a grip that tightened with every passing minute. Floodlights buzzed overhead, their glow slicing thin lines through the dark, but even they seemed muted tonight, as if the base itself were holding its breath. Ethan Cole stood near the motor pool, hands buried in his pockets, watching soldiers finish their rotations and drift toward the barracks. Every movement, every echo, every shifting shadow fed the certainty gathering inside him. There came a point in every soldier's life when silence became complicity. Tonight, Ethan refused to be complicit. He kept replaying Marina's whispered warning, "You don't understand what he can do." But he did understand. Men like Rowan thrived in places where fear twisted itself into obedience, where power dressed itself in authority and no one dared question its motives. Ethan had seen it in combat, in command structures, in the quiet corners where injustice liked to hide. But he also knew something Rowan didn't. Fear was a cage that could be broken, and courage, real courage, never announced itself. It arrived softly, like a breath before a trigger pull. Ethan waited until the bass settled into its nighttime rhythm. The sky stretched ink-black over the desert, dotted with cold stars that looked more like distant warnings than lights. He crossed the courtyard with measured steps, avoiding the brighter areas. He wasn't sneaking, he wasn't hiding. But he knew enough to avoid drawing attention. The officer's wing loomed ahead, windows glowing faintly behind drawn blinds. Somewhere inside, Marina was finishing her evening rounds. Somewhere else, Major Rowan was settling into the comfort of a man who believed himself untouchable. Ethan's heartbeat slowed into a steady, controlled rhythm. He didn't have a plan, not a formal one, but he had intent, and sometimes that was more dangerous. As he approached the side entrance, he heard soft footsteps on the gravel. He turned just in time to see Marina emerging from the service hallway, her arms wrapped around herself, her eyes scanning the night like a hunted animal. She froze when she spotted him. "Sergeant Cole, what are you doing here?" Her voice was barely above a whisper, brittle with panic. "Checking on you," he answered. "Making sure you're safe." She shook her head vigorously, stepping closer. "You shouldn't be here. If he sees you, if anyone sees you—" "Marina," Ethan interrupted gently, "tell me what he did to you." Her breath caught, and she looked away as though the night itself might shelter her from the question. Silence stretched between them, vibrating with everything she couldn't say. When her voice finally emerged, it was faint but resolute. "He's been cornering me," she whispered, "for weeks. Telling me my job depends on being cooperative." The word trembled in her mouth like something poisonous. "He grabs me, blocks doors, says no one will believe a civilian over a major." She lifted her sleeve just enough to reveal the bruise again, darker now under the moonlight, a sickening bloom of violence. "He did this because I told him no." Ethan felt the world narrow to a single point, a point burning hot in his chest. Fury, cold and focused, threaded through him, but he kept his tone calm. "Has he threatened you directly?" Marina nodded, eyes glistening. "He said if I told anyone, he'd have me banned from base housing. I'd lose everything. My job. My brother's medical benefits. We don't have anywhere else to go." Her voice cracked. "I can't afford to make him angry." Ethan exhaled slowly, steadying the storm inside him. "What if someone stood up for you?" he asked. She shook her head again, terrified. "You don't understand. He has power. Influence. People listen to him." "People also listen to truth," Ethan said. "Not in places like this," she whispered, eyes downcast. "Not when it's his word against mine." Ethan stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Then let it be my word too." She looked up, startled. "Why would you risk that?" "Because of the promise he made when he was 12. Because of the memory of his mother hiding bruises and the helplessness that had carved itself into his bones. Because of every person he'd seen broken by silence. Because justice, in all its fragile forms, still mattered. But he didn't say any of that. Instead, he said, because someone should." Before Marina could respond, a door creaked open at the far end of the corridor. Heavy footsteps echoed, measured, authoritative. "Rowan." Marina went rigid. "Go," she whispered urgently. "Please." Ethan hesitated only a second before slipping into a shadowed alcove, just out of sight. From there, he watched as Rowan approached, his silhouette tall and predatory against the dim hallway light. Marina kept her eyes lowered, her hands trembling around the cleaning supplies she clutched like a shield. "Working late," Rowan said, voice smooth and poisonous. "Again." "Yes, sir," Marina murmured. Rowan stepped closer, intruding on her personal space. "I've noticed you've been distant." His finger lifted, tracing the air just shy of her arm. "I hope you're not forgetting our arrangement." Marina swallowed hard. "There is no arrangement, sir." Rowan's jaw tightened. "Careful." His voice dropped to a hiss. "You think anyone will take your side? You think anyone cares?" He leaned in, his shadow swallowing hers. You belong where I put you. Don't make that harder for yourself. Ethan's fists clenched. His pulse thundered. Every trained instinct screamed at him to intervene, to drag Rowan away from her, to break every rule in the book. But he forced himself to remain still. If he stepped out now, Rowan would bury Marina under consequences she couldn't survive. Timing mattered. Precision mattered. Justice required strategy, not impulse. Rowan finally stepped back, his expression satisfied with the fear he'd planted. "We'll talk later," he said, almost casually. Then he walked away, boots echoing down the hall until silence reclaimed the space. Marina stood shaking, one hand pressed over her mouth to keep any sound from escaping. Ethan emerged slowly, his presence soft but solid. She didn't look at him. Instead, she whispered, "You see? He owns this place." "No," Ethan said, voice low but certain. "Not anymore." She finally turned toward him, confusion shadowing her fear. "What do you mean?" Ethan looked down the dark corridor where Rowan had disappeared. "Tonight," he said, "I'm going to do something about this. And when I'm done, he won't own anything here again." Marina stared at him, torn between hope and dread. "Ethan, please don't do anything that will get you hurt." But the decision was already made. Ethan Cole was a soldier, trained, disciplined, and dangerous when pushed. And tonight, he had been pushed beyond the threshold of silence. The base around him hummed with a quiet illusion of order, but Ethan felt the truth thrumming beneath it. Injustice was a fuse, and Rowan had lit it the moment he laid a hand on Marina. Ethan stepped closer to her, his voice steady, final. "I'm not the one who should be afraid tonight." And as the wind shifted across Fort Delaney, carrying the scent of dust and storm, Ethan walked into the shadows with purpose, ready to upend the balance of power before dawn. The desert wind rose like a warning, sweeping across Fort Delaney with a restless, shifting energy that matched the pulse hammering in Ethan Cole's chest. Midnight draped itself over the base in a heavy shroud, muting sound, slowing breath, stretching every shadow into something watchful and waiting. Though soldiers slept and the officers' wings sat hushed behind dim security lights, Ethan felt the night alive around him. Something was coming. He was no longer walking into danger blindly. He was stepping into it willingly, with an intention sharpened to a blade's edge. He walked along the outer wall of the administrative building, boots silent on gravel, until he reached the rear service entrance. He paused, scanning for guards. 2 patrolled the far end, but they were focused on the perimeter, not the back corridor. More importantly, they weren't Rowan's men. These were privates, bored, half-frozen, and entirely uninterested in anything beyond their shift ending. Good. Ethan slipped inside unnoticed. The hallway stretched ahead in sterile white fluorescence, empty and humming faintly. A cleaner's cart sat abandoned against the wall, Marina's. She had finished her rounds. She was safe, for now. But he knew Rowan wouldn't sleep easily. Men who relied on control never slept without tightening their grip. Ethan needed to act before Rowan made his next move. He paused outside the major's office door, listening. Silence. Not the peaceful kind, the wrong kind. The kind that suggested presence, waiting, coiled. Ethan's jaw tightened. He pushed the door gently. It opened with a soft mechanical click. Rowan sat inside, half in shadow, half lit by the glow of his desk lamp. Papers lay squared in neat stacks. A glass of amber liquid rested untouched. Rowan didn't look up immediately. When he finally raised his eyes, his expression was maddeningly calm, as if he had been expecting this exact intrusion. "Sergeant Cole," Rowan said, voice smooth and polished. "Quite late for a walk." Ethan stepped in slowly, closing the door behind him. "We need to talk." Rowan leaned back, fingers steepled. "Do we?" His gaze flicked, predator sharp. "I'm aware you've been hovering around Marina, asking questions you shouldn't." Ethan held Rowan's stare. "I know what you've been doing to her." A thin smile curved Rowan's mouth. Not surprise, not denial, but amusement sharpened with cruelty. "And what exactly do you think you know?" "I know about the threats. The harassment. The bruise on her arm." Rowan chuckled softly, swirling the untouched drink. "Bruises happen. Civilians bruise more easily than soldiers. Perhaps she slipped. Perhaps she's dramatizing. Or perhaps, he leaned forward, you've allowed your imagination to run ahead of your rank. Anger flickered, but Ethan kept his voice level. She told me everything. Rowan's eyes narrowed, but his tone remained infuriatingly composed. Civilians lie when it benefits them. And men like you, men burdened with savior complexes, are eager to believe them. Ethan stepped closer. I believe her because the fear in her eyes is real. Because she won't even walk down certain hallways if you're there. Because she trembles when she hears your voice. Rowan's expression hardened. You're going to drop this? No, Ethan said. Rowan stood slowly, the calm draining from his face like poison leaking from a cracked shell. Do you have any idea, Sergeant, what you're risking? Career termination. Court-martial. Dishonorable discharge. Your entire life's work. All for a maid. Ethan didn't flinch. Her life is worth more than your rank. A long, icy silence settled. Rowan walked around the desk, stopping inches from Ethan. He was taller by only a fraction, but he wielded his authority like a weapon. You think you can intimidate me? Rowan murmured. I own this base. I own the people on it. Not anymore. Rowan's lips twitched, the beginning of a snarl. You don't know what you're doing. Ethan lowered his voice. Then explain it to me. Why threaten her? Why touch her? Why treat her like property? Rowan's mask cracked for the briefest moment, a flash of rage, raw and unrestrained. Because she forgot her place. Ethan lunged before Rowan could react. He slammed Rowan against the wall, forearm braced across the Major's chest. Rowan choked out a gasp, struggling, but Ethan held him firm, his voice low and razor-edged. She has a place, Ethan growled. And it's nowhere near your hands. Rowan's breath rasped in anger. You're assaulting an officer. No, Ethan said. I'm stopping a predator. Rowan shoved back, but Ethan released him purposely, letting him regain balance. He didn't want to give Rowan leverage to claim injury. This had to be controlled. Precise. He stepped back, calming his breath. Rowan wiped his mouth, fury simmering beneath the surface. You think this ends with you walking out of here? You think you can challenge me without consequence? Ethan straightened. I don't care about the consequences. Rowan barked a bitter laugh. Everyone cares about consequences. Not when the right thing is at stake. Rowan leaned in, voice low. I have friends, Sergeant. People who owe me favors. People who bury inconvenient problems. I can make Marina disappear from this base in an hour. I can make your file look like a disaster. One call. One report. You're done. Ethan's expression didn't waver. Then I guess you should start making calls. Because I'm reporting you. For the first time, true fear flickered across Rowan's face. Not fear of Ethan, but fear of exposure. Predators feared nothing except sunlight. You have no proof. I have enough, Ethan said. Her bruises. Her testimony. And I'm betting I'm not the first soldier you've pushed too far. Others will speak up once someone starts the process. Rowan froze, just long enough to confirm Ethan's suspicion. Ethan stepped forward. If you go near her again, if you threaten her, fire her, touch her, or so much as speak her name, I will bring every authority in this chain of command down on you. You will lose your position, your reputation, your career. And I will make sure you never have this kind of power over anyone again. Rowan's jaw clenched so hard the muscle twitched. Get out, he hissed. Now. Ethan held his gaze for one last moment, then turned toward the door. But before leaving, he paused. One more thing, he said without looking back. She's not alone anymore. He stepped into the hallway. The door slammed behind him. The night outside was cold, sharp, electric with danger and possibility. Ethan exhaled, tension bleeding slowly from his muscles. He had sparked something he couldn't contain now, a chain reaction that would bring consequences he couldn't yet predict. But he had also broken Rowan's illusion of control. As Ethan walked back into the shadowed courtyard, he realized the truth settling into him with quiet certainty. Dawn would bring a reckoning, and whatever happened next would change everything at Fort Delaney. Dawn crept over Fort Delaney with a hesitant light, pale streaks cutting through the desert horizon as if unsure whether the base deserved to be illuminated after the night that had unfolded. The cold air carried a brittle stillness, the kind that clings to a place right before truth begins to surface. Ethan Cole woke before reveille again, but this time his chest felt heavier, not with fear, but with the weight of the decision he had already made. No going back. No unringing the bell. Today, everything would break open. He dressed in silence, each movement deliberate, steady, grounded. By the time he stepped outside, the sun was brushing the tops of the barracks with thin gold. Soldiers moved sleepily across the courtyard, unaware of the storm drifting toward them from two directions, Rowan's wrath and Ethan's truth. They passed each other like ghosts crossing paths in a dream, each holding secrets the other couldn't see. Ethan made his way toward the administrative wing. Every step felt like walking deeper into the heart of something that had been festering for far too long. His path intersected with Marina's near the supply building. She stood alone, hugging her coat tightly around her fragile frame, eyes swollen from a night she probably spent awake, waiting for the fallout she feared. When she saw him, her breath caught. "Ethan, what happened?" she whispered, voice shaking. He softened as he stepped toward her. "I confronted him." Her face drained of color. No, you weren't supposed to, if he reports you." "He didn't," Ethan said gently. "He's too afraid of what I know now." Marina shook her head, tears rising. "You don't understand how men like him work. They don't lose quietly." "I didn't come to fight him," Ethan said. "I came to expose him." Her eyes widened, torn between hope and terror. "Do you really think anyone will believe us?" "Not us," Ethan said, voice steady. "Me. And others. I'm going to the inspector this morning. And I think more people will speak once they realize they're not alone." Marina looked away, shaking lightly, as if afraid to believe in anything brighter than the life she'd endured. "And if they don't? What if he turns them against you?" "Then I'll stand alone," Ethan said quietly. "I've done it before." She finally met his gaze again, something soft breaking open inside her. "Why would you risk everything for me?" He hesitated, not because he didn't know the answer, but because some truths felt too personal to expose at dawn in a cold courtyard. "Because no one should face a man like him alone," he said. "Because what he did is wrong. And because if I walk away now, then I become the kind of man I swore I'd never be." Tears slipped down Marina's cheeks, silent but heavy. Ethan reached for her hand, only briefly, only long enough to let her feel the solidity of someone who would not vanish. "Go home," he whispered. "Stay away from the officers' wing today. I'll handle the rest." She nodded, trembling, and slipped away into the growing morning light. Ethan watched her go, small, fragile, but carrying a spark of strength he hoped the world would one day make room for. He turned toward the building and stepped inside. The administrative corridors buzzed faintly with early morning activity. Officers carried clipboards, aides shuffled paperwork, footsteps echoed with rigid authority. Ethan walked past them with a calmness that didn't quite belong to the uniform he wore. Some soldiers glanced at him, sensing something off, but none stopped him. He reached the inspector's office and knocked once. "Enter," came a sharp voice. Inside, Captain Avery sat behind a metal desk, sorting through incident reports. She was stern, meticulous, and known for her refusal to bend protocol for anyone, not even high-ranking officers. When she looked up, surprise flickered briefly across her face. "Sergeant Cole, you're early." "I need to file a misconduct report," Ethan said. Her posture straightened. "Against whom?" "Major Rowan." Avery froze, the room tightening instantly. She set down her pen with slow precision. "That is an extremely serious accusation." "I know. Do you have grounds?" "Yes." She studied him with the cool, analytical gaze of someone trained to detect lies in a heartbeat. "Sit," she ordered. Ethan did. And then, with calm detail and unflinching honesty, he told her everything. Marina's fear, the bruise, the threats, the confrontation last night. Avery didn't interrupt except to clarify timeline and placement. Her face remained unreadable, but the tension in her jaw revealed everything. When he finished, silence settled heavily between them. "You understand," she said finally, that accusing a superior officer will trigger a full investigation, interviews, recorded statements, potential suspension. If any part of your report is fabricated, you will face severe disciplinary action. I understand. You also understand, she continued, that the civilian involved must corroborate your statements. Ethan nodded. She will. She's afraid, but she will. Avery exhaled, a long, quiet release that sounded almost like resignation. I've heard whispers about Rowan before, she admitted. Nothing concrete. Nothing actionable. Maybe this time, maybe it's enough. She stood. Remain available for questioning. Do not leave base. I will begin the process immediately. As Ethan rose, footsteps thundered down the hall. Rowan appeared in the doorway, fury pouring off him like heat. His uniform was immaculate, but his face was twisted with barely contained rage. Captain Avery, Rowan snapped, I need to report a breach of conduct by. His eyes landed on Ethan. His words died. Avery stepped forward. Major Rowan, I've just received a complaint of misconduct against you. Effective immediately, you are suspended pending investigation. Rowan's gaze whipped between them, disbelief crumbling into panic. You can't be serious. It is not optional, Avery said sharply. You will surrender your keycard and remain in designated quarters until further notice. Rowan's voice dropped to a venomous hiss. You, he spat at Ethan. You have no idea what you've started. Ethan met his fury with a calm that surprised even himself. I know exactly what I've started. Avery cut between them. Major, step back. Sergeant, you're dismissed. Ethan left without another word, feeling Rowan's glare burn into his back like claws desperate to cling to a cliff edge. Outside, sunlight finally washed over the base, warm, full, awakening. Marina stood near the courtyard, waiting. Ethan walked toward her. She didn't speak, but when she saw the look in his eyes, steady, certain, unbroken, her breath shuddered out in silent relief. She stepped closer, trembling. What happens now? She whispered. Ethan looked at the base around them, finally beginning to stir with a faint tremor of justice long overdue. Now, he said softly, the truth does what it always does. He paused, letting the morning wind brush past them, lifting the weight of the night. It rises.